you so much for Thank you so much for being here today. We are really excited to be able to talk more about the MVP 2.0 program. My name is Kara Brunston. I am the MVP program director, and I use she, her pronouns. And again, really excited to talk about this new program. For those of you that aren't super familiar with how it's been developing over the past year or two, this is basically the updated version of the MVP planning grant program. So as folks had older MVP plans, started coming to us and asking how could they update their process, that really instigated a review of the first iteration of the MVP planning grant and the development of this new program. So communities that have MVP plans would go through this to revisit their priorities and do a lot of other things that I'll talk about over the course of this webinar. So we're really grateful to have obviously our MVP team working on this, but also a consultant team that is led by Linnean Solutions, and Holly Jacobson is here today to help answer questions that you have. So thanks, Holly. And then their team also had BSC Group on it and Dr. Nina Estrella Luna from Star Luna Consulting. So thank you to all of those consultants for helping us develop this. This was also developed by a lot of you. So we had a really impressive MVP Equity Council that met several times to help us build out this program. As well as a group of about 75 self-nominated MVP review panel members from all different sectors and across the state that helped us review the first iteration of the planning grant and develop this new program. So we hope that you see a lot of the feedback that you provided reflected in this presentation as well. So in terms of what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to do a bit of an overview of MVP Planning 2.0 or MVP 2.0 for short. We are going to talk about details on the FY24 pilot round. So we'll be piloting the program this round, and I'll have more details on that. And then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. I'm sure that everybody has lots of questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. I would just note that we're really looking for communities that are excited to pilot this with us and partner with us to figure out how this is going to work as we roll it out. So just looking for people with that kind of mindset going into it. So yeah, really excited about that. Other notes, we are recording this webinar. We want to be able to provide a link to it on our website so that anyone that couldn't be here today can review it later. And then please use the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you have. And feel free to pop those in there at any time. And then our regional coordinator extraordinaire, Carrie Ann, will be facilitating the questions at the end. And yeah, so we'll move on from there. I also wanted to note that we're still kind of finalizing the request for responses and hoping to release it next week, sometime on Earth Week. So everything I say today, just make sure you read the RFR to see what is actually in there and all of the requirements and things like that. So what is MVP 2.0? So it continues to support Massachusetts communities in increasing resilience to climate change by building off of and filling gaps from the MVP 1.0 planning grant process. In particular, it focuses on revisiting local climate resilience priorities through an equitable and inclusive process and building out and implementing these priorities. So it provides training on strategies for building resilience, equity, and climate justice. It revisits resilience priorities with the involvement of the wider community. It helps the municipality and the community co-develop and implement a project with guaranteed funding for implementation. And it provides a process. Ability for the pilot includes municipalities. And then thanks to our expanded eligibility that was passed by the legislature, we're also able to offer this for state acknowledged and federally recognized tribes in Massachusetts, and MVP eligible RPAs, which are RPAs or regional planning agencies that meet that political subdivision definition. And those groups would be applying on behalf of a municipality or multiple municipalities in a regional group. And we do definitely encourage those regional groupings for this process. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So how is 2.0 different than MVP planning 1.0? First of all, it's not exactly a traditional planning process. The end result is going to be kind of a series of different filled out process tools and guides and things, but it's not going to be like a plan, like a 300-page plan or something that has all your actions in it. There will be a list of your updated resilience priorities. But we heard from a lot of stakeholders just about kind of planning fatigue and not wanting to just like redo what were kind of the gaps and things that people wanted to learn more about from 1.0, and how could we help fill them through this process. So we hope that you'll see this as really building on that process and not just like redoing it over again. You'll be expanding community involvement. So one of the things that we found with 1.0 again is that a lot of the kind of involvement in the different workshops centered around kind of municipal staff or other people that often show up to those types of meetings. And so we really wanted to focus this time on expanding who's involved, and particularly people that will be most impacted by climate change. This process helps you dive deeper into social resilience. So a lot of people, again, felt comfortable with kind of coming up with infrastructure and environmental actions in the first round, but maybe had some gaps in some of the social resilience types of actions. So we're focusing a lot more on that. And we'll also be focusing on translating priorities into action. So we heard that, people really want to not just be, planning, but really implementing those projects. And so that's where this idea of developing and implementing what we're calling a seed project in the second year of this is going to come in. And then this also trains a community team. And we hope that this team will be able to be used not just for the 2.0 process, but potentially for future action grants, as well as other types of opportunities or initiatives that might come up in your municipality. So this is just a list of some of the other benefits of participating in 2.0. So the process is designed to make it easier for communities to apply for future action grants. There is a couple different tools and resources that are included in 2.0 that will kind of aid this. One of them is the seed project plan that communities will fill out to kind of flesh out their seed project idea. And that will be an applicable document for people to use to flesh out action grant ideas in the future. So we're really looking at how to make this useful beyond this process. Data and information collected in the 2.0 process will also be applicable for other grant programs. So especially if you think about other kind of state or federal programs that are really focused on equity or social resilience, we're going to be gathering a lot of data and putting together community teams that I think are going to be really beneficial for those other programs as well. The process supports municipalities in developing relationships to expand and broaden the people involved in government decision-making. And it supports municipalities in piloting a process for equity-focused community engagement that is relevant for many other efforts. So this diagram talks about, just shows kind of the overview of the process. So you can see it's sort of 3 phases, and the process is going to be over 2 years. So the first year is going to be really developing that community group or core team, revisiting resilience priorities with a lot of community engagement, and really involving those groups that will be most impacted by climate change. And then the second year is implementing the seed project, developing the plan for that, implementing, and then leaving some time at the end for reflecting and adjusting. And there will be a process guide that will be released at the same time as the RFR next week. And it will be linked to in the RFR. That's going to walk through all of these steps in a lot of detail and kind of give you all the information that you would need to know to complete the process. So let's say that you get awarded an MVP 2.0 grant. Congratulations. The first thing you'll be doing is hiring a primary vendor or vendor team to help through the process, and that'll be around July or August of this year. Now, this vendor team might be a little bit different than the one that you worked with for the first iteration of the MVP planning grant. And that's because this process is a little different. Again, it focuses more on social equity and moving community engagement and moving from planning to action. So some of the skill sets and expertise that we're hoping that the vendor teams will embody are on this slide. So the first one is equity-centered project facilitation, which would include things like skills in consensus building, equitable community processes, and cultural sensitivity. Expertise in community-driven processes, so developing and implementing equitable and inclusive approaches to outreach and engagement, particularly those designed with and for environmental justice and other priority populations. And then finally, climate and community resilience, so expertise in climate projections and community data, assessing climate and social vulnerability, et cetera. And this, one person might not fit all of these different skill sets, so might need more than one person, which is why we call it a vendor team as well. We'll be providing these qualifications as well as an example RFP for you to use in procurement of your primary vendor. So these are just the tasks that are going to be part of the primary vendor's portfolio. So those include project management, helping to recruit and train the core team, facilitating discussions for climate resilience training, facilitate working sessions and meetings with the core team, guiding and supporting community outreach and engagement, guiding and supporting assessing community and climate data, helping to develop a seed project and draft an implementation plan to build equitable community resilience, and guiding the reflection process. So a couple notes on this. The first is that the list of the MVP certified providers that was provided for the original planning grant program has been retired with this program because those were all trained in the original planning grant program. So pilot communities will again just be provided instead with an example RFP and a set of vendor qualifications to find the primary vendor or vendor team. And then I would also note that we are anticipating that there's actually going to be a second vendor that would be needed for implementing the seed project, depending on what that seed project is. And so somebody with expertise in that particular area would come on board to implement that project with the community. So now I'm just going to talk through the different phases of MVP 2.0. So phase 1, we anticipate will take about 5 months, and we'll be developing the core team. So this will involve groundwork to identify perspectives needed on the core team, recruiting the core team through relationship building, and then doing training in knowledge and skills to do the process well. And that will be training for the core team as well as the vendor, all participating together. So the core team is going to be roughly 10 people, with approximately half being community liaisons. That term might sound familiar from our MVP action grant. So community liaisons are individuals from and/or with strong connections to environmental justice and other priority populations. When I'm saying other priority populations now, that is really a term that we're replacing our former term of climate vulnerable populations that you might be familiar with. We got feedback from our equity consultant and our equity council that that's sort of the preferred terminology. And our definition of priority populations is, in addition to factors that contribute to EJ status, like income, race, and language, other factors like physical ability, access to transportation, health, and age can indicate whether someone or their community will be disproportionately affected by climate change. So if you don't have a mapped EJ community in your municipality, you definitely have priority populations. And so those are the folks that would be represented or serve as liaisons on the core team. And then the other half of the core team will be kind of municipal staff and partners that work in different sectors like planning, housing, public works, conservation, health, or social services. All of those types of people could be a good fit. So what resources and deliverables and supports will you have for phase one? So those are listed on this slide. So first we have a social resilience roadmap that the community will be working on. So in this case, it would be kind of the vendor and the project manager completing part one, identifying lived experience in the community. And this is going to help identify what types of community liaisons might come onto the core team or who they might invite to be on the core team. There's also our new online tool that's called Guides for Equitable and Actionable Resilience, or GEAR for short. So GEAR is going to launch with MVP 2.0 as well, although it will probably be more like later this month or early next month that it comes online, and we'll let you know when it does. But this tool is going to be really helpful for a lot of different steps in the 2.0 process. And so for this step, there is actually going to be a community guide that has lots of data and information on to help explore who's in the community. And so that will be helpful for this step. But the GEAR in general will have, users will be able to click on a community system like housing or ecosystems, and a climate hazard like heat or inland flooding. And then it'll generate a guide that talks about the intersection of those community systems and climate hazards. It will provide data and data explorations to look at those intersections more closely. And then it will talk about different actions and MVP case studies that other folks have taken in those areas. So really interesting tool to help explore vulnerability and then actions that can be taken as well. This slide talks more about the core team training, which is another really exciting new component of the MVP 2.0 process. So if you recall, last time the only training for 1.0 was really for the vendors as they were kind of learning about the 1.0 process. We decided that, and heard from a lot of community members, that folks really wanted that training to kind of build capacity within the community itself. And so the core team and the vendor will go through these two different sets of trainings. The first one is the climate resilience module. So those are going to be 3 videos and then guided discussions with the core team, and those can happen whenever the core team is able to convene them. Materials will be provided and they will be facilitated by the vendor. So those 3 modules are kind of the top row here. So previewing the MVP planning 2.0 process, understanding local climate vulnerability, and then building community climate resilience, and how to craft a climate resilience project. The second part of the training is also really exciting. It's a equity and climate justice learning series. So this is going to be 3 90-minute live virtual sessions that will be organized by MVP and EEA and facilitated by an equity trainer. And when we have the links and all the kind of schedule for that, we'll let you all know how to sign up. But those will include one module on, or one session on understanding social vulnerability, one on conducting an equity-centered community process, and then the last one will be on measuring equity. So moving on to phase 2, we anticipate that this will take about 5 months as well, and will be focused on revisiting resilience priorities. So core teams will do a lot of community outreach and engagement, and also data exploration to uncover factors that shape vulnerability and resilience in the community. And then the core team, with input from the community, will update the community resilience priorities from MVP Planning 1.0 and vet those with the community. So the resources for these steps are on this slide. First, we have an engagement plan tool that will help you identify your engagement plan and tactics for both that uncovering social resilience step and also vetting your new priorities with the community. And that engagement plan is going to be a great tool for other parts of the process as well as in the future for action grants or other initiatives. The gear tool, again, is going to be helpful here because it has a lot of different actions and also the data and information to explore for the social resilience step. There's the social resilience roadmap that you'll be filling out with the core team and the community about community priorities. And then there's the resilience priorities guide that will help update the priorities with insight from the community. All right, so then we've made it to the final phase, which is phase 3. So we anticipate this will take about 13 months. We really wanted to give people some time to both develop a seed project and implement it and leave time for reflection at the end. So you'll be selecting a seed project and vetting that with the community with some more community engagement, developing a seed project implementation plan, and then implementing the seed project, and finally reflecting on the process. So what's a seed project? I've alluded to that a few times throughout the webinar so far. But it's a project that's going to be selected by the core team with input from the community that will jumpstart or advance the community's resilience priorities, and that can be completed in 9 to 10 months. So we're not looking for any project that is going to require like long regulatory approvals, for example, but really a project or project phase that could be completed in around 9 to 10 months. Communities will receive guaranteed funding of $50,000 to complete this seed project. So we hope that that is an exciting incentive for participating in the full MVP 2.0 process. The resources for these steps is on this slide. First, there's a seed project plan. And I mentioned that that is a plan that can also be used for developing competitive action grant projects in the future as well. There are going to be some example seed project one-pagers that you can peruse for inspiration. There's the gear that again has actions to consider and case studies that could be inspirational for this as well. There's the engagement plan that will be helpful for both vetting the seed project idea with the community and also for engagement while implementing the seed project itself. And then there's a final reflection roadmap. So this slide just kind of summarizes those grant deliverables all together. So all of these different kind of guides and roadmaps will be kind of submitted throughout the process with some check-ins with the different regional coordinators, but also submitted kind of at the end. There'll be a final submission form that will also include final invoices, deliverables from the seed project, and photos from the process. The process guide outlines when to submit all of these and check in with your regional coordinator, and we'll obviously be checking in with you on all of this as well. And I also wanted to note that the pilot round will have a few different probably required meetings or feedback points to hear your input on improving the program and provide networking opportunities with other pilot communities in your region. So this slide just has sort of some logistics and further details on the 2.0 pilot round. So we already went over eligibility, and I also mentioned that regional projects are encouraged. Even if you didn't do a regional grant for your first planning process, definitely is a possibility to do it now. And there could be a lot of benefits to it. First of all, we're anticipating doing $50,000 per community for implementing the seed project. So if you do a regional application, you would be getting more money to do a regional seed project together. And then also there's, opportunities for shared capacity. Maybe you're a small community that doesn't have as many kind of identified community liaisons, but working with another community could help kind of build that out more. And also your RPA could kind of play the coordinating role if that works for them and you. So those are some of the things to think about for regional applications. Again, you'll be receiving about $45,000 for steps 1 through 7 and step 9. And that covers basically the primary vendor or vendor team, the community liaison compensation, and the engagement that you'll be doing throughout those steps. And then there's $50,000 again per community for step 8 or implementing the seed project. It's again a 2-year grant. There is no formal match requirement for this. We're not even asking that you track your match. We just want to make sure that you're really committed to the process and seeing it through and seeing it done well. The communities with older MVP plans are particularly encouraged to apply for the pilot round, but anyone is encouraged to apply if you're interested. The idea would be that all communities would go through this eventually after the pilot round. And so, even if there's a lot of interest and we aren't able to fund everyone this round, eventually you will be able to do this. So we're not trying to box anyone out. And then we're hoping to award up to 30 communities or around 5 from each region for the pilot round. But that'll depend on interest and also our kind of final budget. So that's just a target that we have. So in terms of the RFR release, we're hoping that it will be released sometime around next week or the week after at the latest. The Q&A period would be around 2 weeks. So sending us your questions, then we'd post the answer on the Combis website. Applications will be due probably mid to late May, with projects starting in July and ending June 30th, 2025. The application will be submitted by online form. I'll go over that on the next slide. It's really short and sweet compared to the action grant application. We wanted to make it really easy for folks. So you'll see that. And then I also just wanted to note that applicants are still able to apply for MVP action grants at the same time. Obviously, we just want to make sure that you have the capacity to do more than one grant at the same time. So this is kind of what the application is expected to look like. So around 6-ish questions about when the original MVP plan was completed, a letter of commitment from the chief official. Honestly, that will probably take the longest for applicants to come up with. the rest of the application, I would guess you could complete in like an hour. Why the community is interested in the pilot, description of environmental justice or other priority populations in the community, and commitment to centering those populations in the process. Any challenges the community has faced moving from climate resilience planning to action, and a description of other ongoing grants and the capacity to take on this 2-year process. Other attachments to the RFR will have that description of the vendor qualifications for you to look at as you're applying. And then also we will have an attachment that has MVP 2.0 FAQ on it. So we've been compiling a lot of questions that folks have been asking us throughout the past few months, and we'll include those and the answers in the RFR itself. So that was a lot of me talking. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion of this. I can already tell that a lot of people have started putting their questions in. So feel free to keep putting questions in there, and I will pass it over to Carrie Ann to help facilitate.
Thank you so much, Kara. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions that are coming up, and folks feel free to keep using the Q&A box for stuff as it comes up. We understand that this is a lot of information and that there's multiple passes with it that will help with understanding what this new process is. So the first question is asking about recruitment. So does this mean that we can recruit people who are interested in climate issues, but currently have no training or background? If so, that will really help us in recruiting people.
Holly, do you want to take a shot at this one first? I'm happy to fill in.
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, definitely thinking broader than specific training in or conventional concepts in training or background in climate, and really trying to expand this idea that people are experts of their own or bring lived expertise. And so that's based on their own experiences of living in the community, and have own ideas about what does that mean in adapting to climate change, and what will that take for the community to adapt to climate change, and what builds community resilience. So the idea is that we're specifically trying to reach people with lived expertise and who are not involved in these kind of typical trainings, planning spaces to be involved in the core team. So it's a specific intention of the core team to broaden who's on it.
Great, thanks, Holly. The next question is about vendor qualifications. Where does one access the vendor qualifications in order to begin today the process of assembling evidence of qualifications?
Great question. So the vendor qualifications, I think I mentioned this at the end, but they'll be included with the request for responses, and then they'll also be linked to in the process guide as well. But the first place that you'll be able to look at it is the request for responses.
Great. Our next question is about seed project implementation. Will the seed project implementation vendor be procured through a separate process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, sorry, Holly, were you going to say something?
Go for it, Kara.
Okay. So I think basically we are anticipating that the seed project implementation vendor may be separate than the primary vendor. And that's because you're not going to really know what your seed project is until later on, when you hear what your community priorities are and select the seed project. And so, yeah, anticipating that kind of procurement of that vendor would happen later on in the process. Holly, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, or no, more or less the same thing, that process would take place at the beginning of phase 3, once you've developed your implementation plan for your seed project. And so, and depending on the role of the vendor and the type of vendor you need, you'd follow local procurement laws at that point to identify someone, or continue with the same vendor if it made sense.
Awesome.
Great, thank you. This next question is about the core team makeup, and there's some specifics for this person's question. I have advocated for a team of 15 people with 5 seats being allocated to juniors and seniors in high school or young college-age students, especially including Boston area students who participate in the METCO program. Does MVP have a position or comment relative to allocating so many seats to those who have been underrepresented in this process, i.e. students, the population that will live with the decisions made today?
Wow, that's a great question, and one I think that we'd be happy to talk through specifics of as you get going with the process. Right now, the kind of guidelines I guess we have for the core team is really that it would be at least half of those members would be community liaisons. I think I forgot to mention this in the presentation, but we will have like an example budget that you can use with your primary vendor to kind of figure out what the budget will look like, particularly for all the steps except for the seed project implementation, and how to compensate your community liaisons with guidance for that as well. So anyway, those are all the guidelines. I think ultimately it's going to depend on kind of the size and makeup of your community and what the priorities are. But it sounds great that you might have so much interest from that group of folks in your community.
Great, thank you. The next question is about the equity trainings. Will the equity training seminars be open to everyone, even if they aren't selected for the pilot?
That is an excellent question. I don't think that we are anticipating that they would be open to everyone, but again, we do anticipate rolling this out for all communities in the future. So everybody would end up going through the equity training at some point, but just to keep the numbers manageable and all of that, I think those initial ones would be for the folks that are in the pilot.
Great, thank you. Our next question is about seed project implementation. If communities are guaranteed $50,000 to implement their seed project, what level of oversight will EEA be implementing to ensure the seed project is reflective of a competitive, quote, normal MVP action grant proposal?
Also a great question. I think all of our normal non-competitive MVP action projects kind of apply. So like seed projects won't be like generators or cutting trees or things like that. But again, the idea is that the seed project really comes from the community and the community priorities that you'll set through this process. And so we're hoping that with this new process and the engagement with the wider community, we'll get a really great project that's really co-developed with community members. And you'll be submitting your seed project plan or your seed project proposal, or what you hope to do for your seed project to your MVP regional coordinator by the end of the first fiscal year of the grant. And the regional coordinator will kind of review it and talk to you if anything about it seems like it wouldn't necessarily be MVP competitive. And then that actually is going to unlock the funding for the seed project, or that $50,000 for the seed project. Holly, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it well.
Great. The next question is, our town is a recent MVP adoptee 2021. To what extent will we be a competitive applicant?
That is an excellent question. I'd say if you're interested, go ahead and apply. It's only like 6 questions, as I said, plus that letter from your chief official. So really no hurt in applying. It really just depends on how many applications we get, because our target is around 30 grantees, or 5 from each region. So yeah, I would say just go for it. And if it doesn't work out this round, we'll be able to offer this opportunity hopefully in in the future to everybody. So you'll be able to go through it eventually.
Mm. And sort of building off of that, the next question is, do communities need to have already completed an MVP plan to be eligible?
That is an excellent question. So there's only 2 communities that have not applied to the first MVP planning grant process. And so there aren't really a lot of communities that haven't gone through. If either of those 2 communities wanted to apply, I'd be happy to talk to them about it. But it perhaps would be better for like one of the years after this. That's not the pilot process. The tribes and well, yeah, really just the tribes are the only other kind of eligible entity that may not have an MVP plan already. And we are definitely willing to work with the tribes on figuring out how this process would work for them, and they're definitely eligible to apply.
Great, thank you. The next question is about how to identify priority populations. Is this something that the GEAR tool will be doing?
Carrie-Ann, do you want to take this one?
Me?
Yeah. Why not?
I get to do both things, ask the question and answer the question. Yes, the GEAR will definitely, it's going to help you identify priority populations. We've spent a lot of time both asking our review committee about supports that you all need for looking at priority populations, and have done a lot of work in trying to structure the GEAR tool so this way it can help you think about so many of the intersections of who a priority population might be in your community. So yeah. The tools associated with MVP 2.0 will help you with that. So the next question is asking about the 6 regions. And somebody's asking for some questions about the geography and the towns that are included. Maybe somebody on our team could maybe drop a link into the Q&A with one of our maps to sort of explain that a bit more. Our next question is asking about regional benefits versus an individual town in considering applying for 2.0.
Holly, do you want to take this one?
Sure. One of the aspects that we see as a benefit for regional communities, this is definitely a benefit from a capacity standpoint. So we see core teams being developed across the region. So it would include municipal staff and community liaisons from a regional perspective. Regional projects will also get $50,000 per community. So it's a slightly larger scale project to implement a seed project. And so it helps think about it from a regional scale. And I think generally there's opportunities to tackle problems that are really kind of intersectional across communities, or where the implications are falling across communities, and being able to pool resources to think about that challenge collectively is another opportunity that a regional project could bring.
Great, thanks, Holly. Our next question is, do we have a sense yet of how different the pilot year will be different from future MVP 2.0 rounds? i.e., if we wait to apply, any sense of what we might be missing out on?
Great question. I don't have a sense of that yet. I think it really depends on how the pilot round goes. So we'll be collecting feedback from all the pilot communities and integrating that feedback as much as we can into the next round. So yeah, not sure, but it's kind of up to you as to whether you'd be interested in kind of partnering with us on figuring it out, or would rather wait for a future round.
Great, thank you. Should we have a team assembled or mostly assembled prior to applying?
Great question. I assume when they're talking about a team, they're talking about like the core team that we were referencing.
That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, so you do not need to have a team assembled by the time you apply. There's kind of time built into the process, and we really wanted to have time specifically for relationship building and reaching out to different people, and kind of exploring those different partnerships within the grant process itself.
Great. So this next question is a little bit of a scenario question for you about core team formation. Does MVP have any suggestions for or preferences for establishing this new core team, as in an appointed body, committee subject to open meeting law, or more of a task force? I ask because I can imagine that if the community liaison seats are competitive, there could be some ire if the usual voices in our community not representative of priority populations are boxed out. If staff appoint and not the chief elected body, we would have more control to ensure targeted populations are represented.
That is a complex question.
It is.
I think we're kind of open to what kind of body this is. I think we were mostly anticipating it being more of like a task force, at least for the 2.0 process itself, but really interested in trying to figure out ways for these types of groups to continue after 2.0. And that might be more of like the appointed body kind of approach, or yeah, just interested to see what comes out of this. But yeah, I think this would be a great kind of situation to work through in the pilot process and see how it goes.
Great. Given that MVP will not be providing a list of suggested vendors, what support will we be offering to municipalities to find qualified vendors for this process?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned that there will be the qualifications, the example RFP for acquiring a vendor that communities could use in their procurement process. And then we have a couple different links in our Q&A, I think, in the RFR, with just some like resources that you might want to peruse. We haven't like vetted those resources, but at least one of them has a lot of different kind of equity consultants listed on it that could be helpful in figuring out who to advertise your RFP to. So yeah, and then I think we'll be kind of seeing how that goes, and hoping to potentially build out kind of more resources in the future for helping folks with that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Do you have any estimates for how many hours the core team will need to allocate for this process per month? The same question for the hours of the project manager.
Holly, do you remember off
Yeah,
top of your head?
Off the top of my, so it's about 60, we say about 60 to 85 hours is what we've estimated for the entire year. And so there'll be a little bit of ebb and flow from month to month. The largest bits kind of when getting off the ground and recruiting the core team, and then in some of the stages where it involves more of the community engagement process and developing those activities will be more intensive for the community liaisons that are leading those processes. So I would probably estimate about 5 to 10 hours per month, but it would ebb and flow.
Great, thank you. Will the MVP 2.0 plan replace the existing MVP plan for pilot communities?
I love an easy question. Yes, it will.
Great. For a multiple community application, would the 45,000 funding for phases 1 through 7 be shared among all the participating communities, or would more funding be allocated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do anticipate there being a bit of a boost on that 45,000 for a multi-community grant. And then there would also be the 50,000 per community for the seed project. So it would be a bigger grant overall.
Mm-hmm. The funding amount seems to be a bit low, given that for the first phases, the 45,000 needs to pay a vendor and 5 community liaisons. And the second phase, 50,000, is supposed to pay a vendor, community liaisons, and fund the project. Is the municipality expected to cover the costs if it exceeds the grant amount, or will there be an opportunity to apply for additional funding?
That is a good question. I mean, we've like budgeted this out based on kind of typical vendor rates and like a $30 to $50 per hour community liaison amount. So we're going to try this out with the pilot round. If it really doesn't seem to be working for some reason, we'll have to reevaluate. But I think this seems to be the right amount for those hours that we talked about. And I would say that I think there will probably be a little bit of flexibility if, for example, you really needed to pull some of your 50K for the seed project for some of the other steps or something like that. I think that's something we could talk about. But yeah, that's the funding that we're kind of dealing with for the program right now.
Great. Would communities not doing MVP 2.0 be able to see gear?
Yes, it will be publicly available, and the point is to help with 2.0, but also just for the general public to learn about the intersections between some of these climate hazards and community systems and learn about actions.
Great. Can you give examples of seed projects? Obviously, time constraints and resource constraints limit what can be achieved. Also, how do you anticipate regional seed projects will work?
Sorry, I was reading an answer to a different question. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, sure. This person is looking for examples of seed projects and is curious about how would, if a community does a regional application, what would then a seed project process look like for a regional application?
Okay, got it. Yeah, there'll be several different resources for seed projects. One is the seed project one-pagers that we are developing, and those will be part of the web page and process guide for 2.0. I should mention that for next week, it's really going to be the RFR and the process guide that will be published. And we're working on finalizing a lot of these other documents. So those will be added as they get finalized. So thank you for bearing with us in advance on that. And then there will also be all of the examples in the gear guides themselves for seed projects. And for regional projects, I think we anticipate kind of figuring out what project you would want to do in the same way that you would if you were just an individual community, working with your core team, doing outreach and vetting with the different communities. I think we're open to like if it's actually like a regional project, which I think would make sense, or if the regional group really wants to do a project in one particular community, and that's, you know, what they all decide. I think that's also fine.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. When 2.0 is rolled out to everyone, meaning beyond the pilot year, will there still be funding for all community liaisons, or is that just special to the pilot year?
No, that is not special for the pilot. There will be funding for community liaisons in subsequent years.
Is there money allocated to hire a separate project manager, or does the project manager need to be a town employee?
So I think this question could get a little nuanced, but if the project manager is like the project manager is, I think we're assuming is going to be like the municipal staff that applies for and kind of leads the project on the municipal side. So those folks would not be eligible to be paid for grant funding. If your project, if you're like in a small town and you're person kind of spearheading the project is like a volunteer or someone who's not like a full-time municipal staff, which often happens in smaller towns. Any of those types of people would be eligible to be paid out of the grant funding. So yeah, I don't know if I fully answered that question, but that was just the point that I wanted to make on that.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a great moment to say that if we can't get to everybody's questions, or you feel like we haven't directly answered your question, to please get in touch with your regional coordinator and follow up with anything, because there, like we said, there's a lot of details here. It's new and it's a pilot, so there's many things to be figured out, and we're here to figure that out with you. And so we appreciate your continued curiosity. So we only have 2 more minutes left. There are still a few questions in here. And so I'm going to try to prioritize them as best as I can. This next question is asking about if you apply as an RPA and you have more than 5 towns who might be interested in doing a regional application, is it possible to have a regional application that would go beyond 5?
Great question. So I think we're capping the regional applications at 6, I believe we had landed on. And that's really because we want to make sure that all of the communities are actively participating in the process. And I think if it gets bigger than that, it might be difficult to kind of make sure that that's happening on an equal basis between the communities. So that was our cap for that.
Great. So we just have 1 more minute left, so I'm gonna stop the questions at this moment and let you say your goodbyes and any further wrap-ups that you need.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie Ann. We'll be posting the recording and the slides to our website in the coming days, hopefully by next week. So you can take a look at it then. If we didn't get to your question, again, just email it to your regional coordinator and we'd be happy to continue the discussion offline. But really, thank you so much for your interest. We're really, really excited about this new program and excited to partner with a lot of you to kind of pilot it and figure out how to make it the best that it can be. So thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.